Hello, my name is Brittany Dock, and I will be presenting the country France in this comparative education presentation. Overview of the country. The following slides will display various aspects of French, including its culture, political, social, and economic framework for the purpose of comparison with the United States. A country's national anthem is said to reflect the country's national identity to the world by embodying the founding philosophical and social principles through musical expression. Its goal is to unify and inspire its people with respect to the nation's culture. The French national anthem was composed during the French Revolution, April 24, 1792, by Claude Joseph Rouget de Lys. It served as a march song for the French troops after France declared war on Austria on April 20th, 1792. The anthem expresses a patriotic sentiment that portrays themes of pride and willingness to crusade for justice against those deemed as enemies to France's cause. To me, this is important because I feel like it embodies the air of elitism and unity that France portrays as their national identity in comparison to how they present themselves to the world. Geographically, France is located in Western Europe, but it is also comprised of several provinces: French Guiana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Mayotte, and Réunion. The focus of this presentation will be metropolitan France in Europe. France is 643,801 square kilometers, which in comparison to the US is slightly more than 4 times the size of Georgia or slightly less than Texas as depicted. People and society. The population of France is 68,521,974 people, ranking at number 21 globally. The people are mostly concentrated in the north and southeast regions of the country, with Paris being the capital and largest city of France. The nationality of people are French men and French women, but the country is very diverse and comprised of many ethnic groups. There is a plethora of languages spoken, but French is the primary language of this country. Many people of France fall between the age range of 15 to 64 per recent census surveys, and life expectancy would be around 83 years old. Educationally, the French dedicate 5.5% of its gross domestic product for education expenditures, which is not much and ranks 58 globally. School life expectancy, which encompasses primary to tertiary education, averages around 16 years. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD for short, reports that France, 50% of 25 to 34-year-olds had a tertiary qualification in 2021, compared to 47% on average across other OECD countries. To me, this implies that citizens in France are seeking further education that is more specialized to become more marketable for France's labor market and for their lives to be more fulfilling. Government. France's government is semi-presidential republic, also known as the French Republic. Similarly to the US, the federal government consists of three branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative. The president is the highest ranking government official, with the prime minister serving secondary. To understand France's cultural framework, specific aspects will be analyzed in comparison to the US to determine cultural difference between the two countries. For power distance, France ranks at 68 and America ranks at 40. This is due to potential lack in education from parentage and children being considered emotionally dependent. As students become dependent on their teachers, they eventually learn to be dependent on their superiors in the labor market. It aligns with the stratification methods used educationally in America, where uniqueness is prized. The best and the brightest are nurtured and pushed to greatness, and the others pretty much get in where they fit in due to the unequal power distribution. For individualism, France ranks at 71 and America ranks at 91. France is considered to be more individualist society, as parents make their children independent amongst social groups in which they belong. And that is as far as their socioeconomic status. This can be seen as a bit of a contradiction in comparison to the high score of power distance, because with power being potentially difficult to obtain from your social ranking in society, it is somewhat obtainable if you're deemed exceptional. This is aligned in America as well, as upward mobility is also obtainable with meritocracy in a place to award hard work as a form of recognition. For the category of masculinity, France ranks at 43 and America ranks at 62. With France having more of a feminine culture, at times that can be seen as having a negative connotation. In actuality, this is more aligned with the benefit and valuing of its peoples or citizens. France implements a notable welfare system, a 35-hour work week, and holidays to prioritize quality of life. America, on the other hand, values hard work, is very performance-based, and is not as gracious to its citizens. For uncertainty avoidance, France ranks at 86 and America ranks at 46. Simply put, the French don't like surprises, and structure and planning are of utmost priority. There are rules for everything. In comparison to America, scoring is below average, and this could be primarily due to having a consensus of laws that are on the federal level, and then states' laws vary by state. For long-term orientation, France ranks at 63 and America ranks at 26. The score for uncertainty avoidance leads to long-term orientation because of France or the French being more pragmatic. They are very adaptive, but believe in perseverance to achieve desired results. Lastly, for the indulgence, France ranks at 48 and America ranks at 68. The French are mostly conservative and do not believe in overly indulging, whereas America pretty much flaunts their prestige through indulgence in things of high monetary value. World religious analysis. For France, 37.1 view religion as important, and then 23.7 believe it to have some importance. 24.7% do not believe it to be important at all. 63% of the French are in or of the Christian faith, Roman Catholic to be specific, while 28% are non-religious. I believe their ability to be more flexible culturally while still having respect for tradition is what the numbers reflect. This is why in reviewing France's traditional versus secular values and survival versus self-expression, France is skewed more towards the liberal side of the spectrum as it relates to self-expression. In education, they study philosophy, the arts, and the sciences. It is not likely that they are troubled with survival due to the systems in place, such as welfare and practice of universal education for all. Again, the same goes for their beliefs on secular views, which makes them less traditional. Frenchmen are more rational with their views for the advancement or betterment of society. World Values Survey Children Qualities. The following slides will show how the French prioritize specific skills in their structure of the educational system, as well as purpose. With respect to cultural perspective, these ideas will be compared with the U.S. Independence. For independence, 36% of the French mentioned that it is important for children to be independent, compared to 55.5% of Americans mentioning its importance. Less than half of Americans did not mention the quality of life at all, compared to 63.7% of the French. To me, this means the French culture does not value independence more than the American culture values it, which is also on trend for Hofstede's cultural dimensions, because American culture is more stratified than French culture. Hard work. For hard work, 41.3% of the French mentioned that it is important for children to have a trait of hard work, compared to 67.9% of Americans. A little over 30% of Americans did not mention the quality at all, compared to 58.4% of the French. My analysis of this quality is that hard work in French culture is not of great significance, but it is valued a little more than American culture, which is also on trend for Hofstede's cultural dimensions. The French take care of its people in comparison to America's labor market culture. Feeling of responsibility. For feeling of responsibility, 63.8% of the French mentioned that it is important for children to have this trait, compared to 59.3% of Americans. Less than half of Americans did not mention the quality at all, compared to 35.9% of the French. The French culture does prioritize the feeling of responsibility slightly more than the American culture. Imagination. For imagination, 21.0% of the French mentioned that it is important for children to have great imagination, compared to 29.8% of Americans mentioning its importance on the survey. The two countries are about aligned in culture when valuing the importance of imagination in education for students. Tolerance and respect for other people. For this trait, 84.2% of the French mentioned that this is an important quality for children to have, compared to 70.8% of Americans. About 29% of Americans did not mention the quality in the survey, compared to 15.4% of the French. Both cultures value tolerance and respect for others, but the French do significantly more value it than the American culture. With both cultures being very diverse, this seems to be accurate according to Hofstede's cultural dimensions. For thrift saving and money assets, 37.9% of the French mentioned that it is important for its citizens to be more cost efficient or less indulgent, compared to 27.2 of Americans mentioning its importance. The French culture does not value thrift saving more than American culture values it, but their percentage is slightly higher. According to Hofstede's cultural dimensions, the numbers appear off, but I believe it is because French are more conservative in comparison to America, because of the way they prioritize spending compared to America's ability to overindulge. These percentages seem accurate. For determination and perseverance, 46.7 of the French mentioned that it is important for children to have this quality, compared to 38.6 of Americans. More than half of Americans did not mention the quality at all, compared to 53.0% of the French. The French culture does prioritize this quality more than America. This is understandable as the French prioritize education for the purpose of economic and political advancement and bettering the society. The French do value educating their youth or their students for the sake of quality of life. For religious faith, 8.9 of the French mentioned that it is important for children to be religious in faith, compared to 32.1% of Americans mentioning its importance. Both of the French and American cultures do not value religious faith in education of students. In America, there are religious schools, but there is an overall push for a separation of church and state, especially in teaching practice for public education. The French are more liberal and progressive, so with them being at least traditionally religious country, this is more trend for both countries. The quality of unselfishness ranks at 45.1% for the French and 23.8% for Americans. This quality is not of utmost importance to either country or their culture. Because the French culture does operate in a more individualist perspective in doing what benefits them, it makes sense that the percentage is higher in comparison to America, which practices taking care of its loved ones. For obedience, 25.9% of the French mentioned that it is an important quality for children to have, whereas America ranks at 20.5%. The French culture does value obedience more than the American culture values it. This seems to be accurate according to Hofstede's cultural dimensions because French are very rigid in their rules and uncertainty avoidance. Measures of wealth, social progress, and gender equality. The following slides will show various factors that impact France's culture in respect to their economic and social practices. Human Development Index. This slide will display the measure for France's progress in the areas of life expectancy and longevity, access to education, and standards of living. In 2021, France's HDI value was 0.903, which places the country in the very high range for human development and a ranking of 21 out of 191 countries and territories mentioned in this survey. In comparison with the US, France falls a bit short, with America's value being 0.921. In comparison to the world, both France and the US are doing substantially well. France's improvements have come from increases in life expectancy at birth, mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling, and gross national income. Social Progress Index. France ranks with a score of 86.7 and number 20 in comparison to other countries and territories mentioned in this survey. Their scorecard highlights the country's relative strengths and relative weaknesses compared to 15 peer countries with a similar GDP per capita. Elements of Social Progress Index are marked with a blue dot where the country performs comparatively well, a red dot where it performs relatively poor, a yellow dot where its performance is average for its peer group, and a gray dot where this isn't sufficient data to make a judgment. Elements marked with a blue ring are areas where the country slightly overperforms, while areas where the country slightly underperforms are marked with a red ring. France is ranked as having adequate performance compared to its peer group. They received a scoring of overperforming in the area of personal freedom and choice, and average performance in the areas of basic human needs, foundations of well-being, opportunity, water and sanitation, access to information and communications, shelter, health and wellness, inclusiveness, personal safety, environmental quality, and access to advanced education. Their highest component scores rank from personal rights, access to basic knowledge, water and sanitation, nutrition and basic medical care, access to information and communications. Their lowest component scores come from the areas of inclusiveness, personal safety, access to advanced education, environmental quality, and health and wellness. Although their lowest component scores are areas of weakness, their rankings are of higher value. Gender Equality Index score. This slide will measure gender gaps in achievement in areas of health, knowledge, and living standards. The 2021 female HDI value for France is 0.898, in contrast with 0.907 for males, resulting in a GDI value of 0.990, which places it in Group 1. It is very close with the US ranking, which has a GDI value of 1.001. The numbers of affluence that women achieve in France is synonymous to that of males, whereas in America, women are doing significantly better in the areas of life expectancy and expectant years of schooling. Mean years of schooling is about the same in both countries, but the female gender is lacking significantly in gross national income per capita in both countries. With both countries being more patriarchal historically, women in France are faring slightly better, as France is more progressive in comparison to women in America. PISA student performance. The following slides will show a comparison of France's student performance rates in comparison to the US's performance rates on the assessment. In reading literacy and science, America's students are performing better, scoring about 12 points higher than French students on the PISA. On literacy, a 9-point difference in science. In these subjects, female students outperform male students. France's students perform better in mathematics with a 17-point difference, and male students outperform female students in both countries. As literature and the sciences are more historically interwoven into French culture, it is not surprising that France outperforms America in these subjects. I would think exposure to these texts would happen earlier on in children's education, with France being more liberal and progressive. Also, because in the French education system, students begin schooling earlier, around the age of 3 years old. America is very stratified, and only the elites are exposed to more complex texts and subject matter of academia. I did find it enlightening that the difference between the advantaged and disadvantaged students in reading is higher in France compared to America. To me, this seems as if the disadvantaged are better supported educationally in America compared to France. And it makes me wonder how this translates to those students being prepared for the future. Final discussion. France's purpose of schooling is to aid in the development of the person as a whole. The French school system is more centralized, with public education being accessible to all. The curriculum is more standardized, but the culture is embedded to instill an appreciation and sense of pride. Schooling begins at a very young age, and education is monitored by the French Education Ministry. The French value academics over personal interests, so they are very performative in nature and place a heavy emphasis on assessment and continuing education. Students are meant to think critically and develop deeper understanding of concepts taught by teachers who have full authority in schools. Some of the most important findings found in the data was that there wasn't much of a gender equality gap as there is here in America, but I am a bit more grounded in my beliefs of how the French view themselves as an elite group of society and why that is. Educationally, this is how students are supported in schools from more of a holistic and cultural perspective. The French are more of an effeminate culture and believe in doing what is best for its citizens. This proves to be beneficial because the French are living longer and are more fulfilled in their lives. They are able to pursue further education to better themselves, and education isn't as costly there as it is in America. Post-secondary education is only obtainable here in America if you can afford it, and so many go into debt trying to do so, whereas it is encouraged to get further education in France. The country's SPI, Social Progress Index, is of high ranking, which reflects the culture as well. Overall, I would say France's purpose for education is for social control, with schools seeking to develop good people who faithfully support its society's status quo. Another purpose could be for societal aims and status interests, where schools maintain the existing order that has already been established for the society and culture.